I work at NetApp on NKS. It's NetApp Kubernetes Service. It's a platform. That's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to talk about DevOps platforms, cloud-native platforms. I previously also worked at Red Hat and CoreOS, so I know how some of the sausage is made for some of these things. So in order to get into this, we're going to have to talk about definitions, unfortunately, but hopefully we can keep this light and fun. What's not light and fun are definitions like these. DevOps is a combination of culture, philosophies, practices. I don't know about you, but if I've ever had a conversation about what DevOps is with someone in person, it never sounds like this. So it's strange to me that we always define it like this officially online. I think perhaps a better definition comes from a friend of mine, Ken Mugridge, not quite sure how to pronounce his last name, but he works at ThoughtWorks. And his definition, this is from a slide deck of his that he's done presentations on. It's just a culture where there's shared responsibility, essentially. All of your teams are going to share responsibility for the work that they do. So that's relatively easy. We can use that to build the definition for why you would want a platform that supports that. So next, let's dive into what cloud native is. We're choosing the hard ones to define up front here. So cloud native technologies empower organizations. This is another definition that is somewhat tragic in that I never hear people actually reference cloud native this way. In fact, most people say, what is cloud native even? And to add insult to injury, CNCF's own definition has changed dramatically over the years. It used to be very container focused, as you can see from point number 2 here. This is from back in 2017. These days, it's focused on like APIs and sort of vague buzzwords for technologies that we consume from the cloud, but it doesn't really say what it is. I prefer this definition from JBD. She's big in the Golang community, and her take on it is essentially just that cloud native is designing systems that you assume are going to fail as the default state. This is, the result of us using commodity hardware and doing distributed computing. All of the algorithms that we rely on for those things really take this into account. The network is going to fail, the machines are going to fail, the containers that we deploy are going to fail. So I think cloud native is easily defined as failure is the default state. And finally, for the point of this talk, what's platform? And I've crossed out as a service here because who buys software for like $60 and never pays for it again these days? Like you can do it on your phone occasionally, but for most of the software we're consuming for our professional work, almost everything is as a service. So I think it's time that we stop saying PaaS and we just call it a platform. So again, Martin Fowler defines a digital platform as a foundation of self-service, APIs, tools. Great for academic contexts, means very little to me when I'm talking about platforms informally. When I think about platforms, I think about the web platform, HTML, CSS, JavaScript. I think about the LAMP stack. So part of what a platform is tools, a collection of tools that we use to build something. And sort of the canonical platform to me is Heroku. And the real reason you sign up for a service like Heroku, why this was innovative back in the day, is you could just give them your code and they sort of figured out a lot of the stuff behind the scenes for you. Part of this dovetailed with Rails when Rails was first coming out. And Rails was very vocal about a lot of the things that they valued when they were developing their product, and I think these are some of the key points for what make a good platform. It's convention over configuration. It's the menu is omakase. That means there's a defined menu of the items that you can pre-select, but if you are very clever or you really need something, you can customize it, and more often than not, you will need to customize the platform that you're building on top of. So it works out of the box, and if you need to customize it, you can do that. So what is a cloud native platform? Why is everybody building one of these? Why is NetApp? Why is VMware? Why is everybody investing in their own version of this? Well, what it is, it's failure as a default state, but you're getting the nice integration. You're getting that turnkey, I want to order this from the menu sort of experience. And this is complicated by the fact that for classic platforms like the LAMP stack or for web platforms, we could easily name all of the components that were in the platform. But in today's day and age, this is either the most brutal vision test ever devised, or it's the Cloud Native Computing Foundation's landscape for all the projects that you get to choose from. So there's quite a lot on here. I think approaching 500 different projects. And if you're not using a platform where everything is sort of integrated out of the box for you, you're assembling this from scratch yourself. That is tough. There's a lot of stuff out there, and it's very challenging. For what I look at in the space that I work in, Kubernetes, this is maybe a dozen, what I would say the minimal set of functionalities that you need to actually build a platform and make it usable out of the box. Two of these are maybe optional, service meshes and custom catalog. You could sort of probably make an argument that you don't need them, but for most of these, you're assembling them from components in the CNCF landscape. And quite a lot of effort has to go into connecting all of these pieces together if you're not buying a product that does that for you. Similarly, in the DevOps space, there's a similar problem where there's a lot of different options for projects, but that sharing responsibility piece sort of complicates things. So when you look at GitLab, you're not just replacing sort of a single category. The products that they plug in sort of tend to span multiple different responsibility roles. And integrating these together nicely and making it so you can easily modularly kind of plug something else in, like using Ansible Tower in that last presentation rather than GitLab CD, becomes pretty important when you're consuming a product like this. So when a platform is done right, it makes this very complex process of integrating all of these tools together sort of seamless. You get this experience where it's just a single straight flow from development to production, and you don't really think about it. It's that Heroku-like experience, or it's what I like to call a push-button experience. And this is echoed in our own product. It's not just GitLab saying this. We say we simplify the cloud. Any platform that's trying to sell you something is going to promise that they simplify things. So let's dive into what we've learned actually building a platform. So the first recommendation is just you need to invest in security from the outset. If you're not planning for security from the start, you're probably going to run into problems. That said, security is an unsolvable problem. So it can be one of those things where new technology has emerged, or it just increased the scope of a project too much to do everything under the sun to make your platform perfectly workable. One great approach to this is to shadow or mirror traffic, and a lot of the service mesh technologies for Kubernetes make that really easy if you're implementing security late in the game. The next piece is just that the philosophy of design your application for 0, 1, or many of something is sort of a lie. It's a nice concept that your app should be able to handle infinitely large set of things, but the reality is there's usually some legitimate cap to what your application can scale to. And you should know what that is. For Kubernetes, it's about 500 nodes or so before you have to start tweaking cluster configuration. This is taken from a recent Barcelona KubeCon talk by Josh Rosso and Craig Tracy. It's worth checking out. You want to think about multi-tenancy. So most products, multi-tenancy is very hard. Kubernetes is no exception to that. And you also want to think about what happens when you have a noisy neighbor or someone who does something sort of destructive on your cluster. Is that going to affect everyone else? The usual solution to that is to be able to spin up new clusters or isolate workloads as different cluster sets. and have sort of a single pane of glass for managing multiple clusters. And part of what makes that possible is, can your platform be deployed or redeployed as a single button push? Is it easily automatable? This can be difficult as a sort of single button push, but the move towards infrastructure as code is part of the thinking that aligns with this. You want to be able to easily replicate what's already out there if you need to. Final piece for me, or one of the final pieces I should say, is this is a classic Netflix saying. As they were moving to AWS, they said, look, the undifferentiated part for us is managing compute. We don't benefit by doing that, so we should just have someone else do that for us. And this, to some degree, flies in the face of the open philosophy of platforms that we've all sort of grown up around. And I think the openness is important for platforms. Without openness, you tend to fall into a state where you're in a walled garden. In other words, you're only able to select from the ecosystem of choices that that vendor has provided to you. You can think about old school compute companies that have taken over most of the market. They tend to gravitate towards this strategy. It's very appealing when you're building a platform to build with closed components. Whoops. So while I think it is very important for the platform that you're building on to be open, I think individual components that you plug into that platform, it's perfectly fine to grab something that's closed and introduce that. The individual component doesn't necessarily need to be open, but the ecosystem is definitely important to remain open. And the degree of openness or closedness, I should say, is a gradient. So this is helpfully illustrated by toast here. You'll see a blend of open and closed in most platforms that you interact with. A lot of like open quote-unquote platforms these days are introducing a lot of what you would consider closed technologies as wrappers around those open things. So you should be very mindful when you're shopping in the marketplace, because those are the things that will tend to be harder to replace as you build on top of a platform. I'll also say that I think serverless is basically just another term for a platform. It's the idea is that serverless is something that can easily scale to zero. I think that the dream that serverless fulfills is actually very similar to the dream that Heroku fulfills, which is you just write your code, you don't care how many instances of it there will be, you want it to scale as it needs to as traffic comes in. I think it's following up on that, and I think there's been a big clash between container-based communities and serverless-focused communities, which I think is rather silly. It seems like both of them are converging on the same space. It's more just about how involved you want to be in the management of your infrastructure. And I think actually getting to closing, all platforms lead to IKEA, so I like to think of this as the value of a platform is something that's tightly integrated. You're buying a product, like I said, where you can do that push button sort of deployment or use of it. That's what we shop for. So when we're going around IKEA, we're looking for something that looks like this. But in order to get this, we wind up here, shopping for this, probably fighting with the people who we're going to IKEA with, and then getting splinters in our hands when we go home. If a platform promises that it's going to do everything for you and you don't have to customize anything, you're probably being misled. No platform perfectly fits every business. So all platforms require some customization. The goal to get to a push button experience is more of an ideal. It's an ideal that I don't think we'll ever reach, but it is useful to remember that you're probably still going to have to do some custom work. So, there we go. Okay. Platforms strive for push button experiences. that is what we're paying for when we're buying a platform. It's not something fuzzy or bizarre or mystical. It really is just you want an integrated product that you can use out of the box. And if you're interested in checking out the platform that I work on, you can see it here. It's NetApp Kubernetes Service. Any questions?